Hi, my name is Kennedy Reed, and today I'll be discussing current issues in America today that has impacted everyone across the country. The topic I will be discussing is police brutality. According to National Institutes of Health, police violence may hinder collectively efficiency by eroding trust in law enforcement government institutions, particularly in communities with the Black Americans and minorities in all. When law enforcement is seen as an oppressive force instead of a guardian of public safety, it can result in increased public anxiety and annihilation. It have increased, particularly among us all. Someone that has been affected by the police brutality that everyone has talked about and know about is George Floyd. George Floyd was killed by Minnesota police and was murdered, actually, and they were let free, I believe. This case impacted the United States, especially from white police officers killing African Americans. According to Public Health, it reads, among people non-fatally injured in police shootings, victims identified as non-Hispanic Black comprised 29% of race-identified injured people in the study. Most Black Americans thought that police officers were not held accountable for their misconduct, while less than half of white Americans thought the same. Racial prejudice in American institutions is systematic, as evidenced by the persistent police violence against minority groups, which exacerbates social divisions and inequality. Incidents of police violence often spur protests and social movements such as Black Lives Matter, which call attention to these systematic injustices. These movements advocate for reforms, but also reflect the broader struggles for racial inequality and social justices. Protests and social Black Lives Matter, which call attention to the systematic injustices. These movements advocate for reforms, but also reflect the broader struggles for racial inequality and social justice. Protests and social movements like Black Lives Matter, which draw attention to the structural inequalities, are frequently sparked by instances of police violence. These movements support reforms, but they also mirror larger fights for social injustice and racial inequality. The issue of police brutality in the U.S. resonates globally, inspiring similar movements and solidarity protests in other countries. For instance, the Black Lives Matter movement has sparked activism worldwide, with police violence occurring in the UK, Canada, Australia, and other countries. The issue's global reach has drawn attention to police brutality in other nations as well as the United States, bringing to light comparable problems with institutional racism, police force militarization, and excessive force. And this causes a lot of conflict between regular citizens. Police misconduct can violate constitutional rights, including the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, which is the 4th Amendment, and the right to equal protection under the law, which is the 14th Amendment. When law enforcement agencies engage in misconduct, it undermines the rule of law, making it difficult for citizens to feel protected by the system that is supposed to uphold justice. The stress and fear associated with police violence contributes with the broader health crisis and effect of communities, particularly with regard to mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and trauma. A consistent problem in case of police misconduct is the failure to hold officers accountable. In many cases, officers are not charged or convicted to their actions, which persecutes a culture of impunity within law enforcement. Police brutality disproportionately affects Black and Latino communities, racial profiling, discriminatory police practices, and racial parties. Sorry. While police issues will likely focus on. This includes ending qualified immunity, shields officers from civil liability, strengthening independent review processes, and ensuring that officers who commit abuses are held accountable. While police brutality and misconduct remains persistent, problems growing public awareness and activism has made reform essential issues in U.S. politics. Future efforts to address these issues are likely focused on stronger accountability mechanisms. This includes ending qualified immunity, shields officers from civil liability, strengthening independent review processes, and enduring the officers who commit abuses and are held accountable. More and more police officers are getting away with these murders just because they have the power to get rid of what they've done. They have the power to make it seem like nothing ever happened because they are the government. They are part of everything. Police brutality and misconduct in the U.S. are deeply entrenched issues with profound and lasting consequences. While efforts to address them continue, significant work remains to ensure that all individuals, regardless of race or background, are treated fairly and justly by the police. Effective reforms will require both systematic changes in law enforcement and broader social efforts to combat racism, inequality, and the misuse of power. The history of police brutality in the U.S. is deeply intertwined with the country's legacy of slavery, segregation, and racial inequality. The origins of modern American policing can be traced back to slave patrols in the South. These patrols were responsible for controlling enslaved African Americans and maintaining a racially stratified social order. After a civil war and the abolition of slavery, police forces continued to enforce laws that impacted Black Americans, such as the Jim Crow laws. In the mid-20th century, police brutality became particularly visible during the Civil Rights Movement. It started in places like Birmingham, Alabama, and Selma, Alabama. Police used violent tactics to suppress peaceful protests for Black civil rights, often under the direction of local authorities. The modern era of police brutality is often marked by the killing of Rodney King in 1991, whose brutal beating of LAPD officers caught on tape became a defining moment. This incident led to the 1992 Los Angeles riot, which exposed deep frustrations with police brutality and the lack of accountability for officers involved in the abuse. Police brutality is not limited to isolated incidents. It is often a pattern, especially in certain communities and areas. Some key factors contribute to the problems include racial profiling. Racial profiling is African Americans, Latinos, and other people of color were racially profiled, targeted by police. Racial profiling often leads to unnecessary stop, searches, and use of force in Black and Latino communities, which George Floyd had to go through. Excessive force and militarization. In many cases, police officers resort to excessive force, even in situations where nonviolent de-escalation techniques could be used. The increasing militarization of police force with military-style weapons and equipment has also been linked for more aggressive police tactics. Excuse me. One of the key issues with police brutality is the systematic lack of accountability. Officers who engage in misconduct including excessive use of force and often not held criminally or administratively accountable. The legal doctrine of qualified immunity protects officers from lawsuits unless they have violated clearly established law, making it difficult to hold them accountable. In many police departments, there is a blue wall of silence, an informal code of conduct that discourages officers from speaking out against misconduct. This contributes to a culture where officers feel they can act with impunity. Over the past few decades, several high-profile cases of police brutality have sparked national and international outrage, protests, and calls for reform. This is some people that went through police brutality. Rodney King in 1991, Eric Garner in 2014, Michael Brown in 2014, Tamir Rice in 2014, Freddie Gray in 2015, George Floyd in 2020, Breonna Taylor in 2020. These cases have started riots and protests and to fight for what's right within the community and what's been happening.